Live now. Yeah. Okay. So,
Perfect.
hello, folks. I hope you are doing good, and welcome back to new webinar wherein we'll try to, understand what Kestra is. We'll also discuss about some project ideas. And Will is here with us. Will is from Kestra. Will, would you like to give yourself a quick introduction?
Yeah, of course. So, hi everybody. I'm Will. I'm a developer advocate at Kestra. So, my job is to try and help people like you understand how you can best use Kestra in your projects. Now, before Kestra, I used to have a big background in hackathons. Going back to university, I used to go to lots of hackathons, creating the most wackiest things with various APIs and cloud platforms. And so, I'm hoping with some of that background, as well as my experience with Kestra, we can come up with a few interesting project ideas today to help you with the hackathon this weekend.
Um, I guess that's great. And Will, do you have, or maybe how excited are you for maybe this event, or what are you expecting out of it?
Yeah, I'm really excited actually because Kestra as an orchestration platform, it's a sort of thing people haven't necessarily heard of the word orchestration. They've maybe used something like GitHub Actions before as a CI/CD platform, or maybe something like Zapier as something to connect two different APIs together. But orchestration as an idea is something that people aren't always super familiar with. They've probably used it, but they haven't maybe realized what it is. And so I'm really interested to see what people can come up with, especially because we've designed Kestra as a versatile tool where you can do lots of different things with it. Really, it's up to your imagination. And I think that's where HackFrost this weekend is going to be a really cool opportunity to see quite how much you can do with Kestra. Hopefully, I'll learn a few things that you can do with Kestra because some of you will push the limits. Hopefully, you won't break it too much, but if you do find the odd thing that's not working, then that's also fantastic feedback. And as Kestra is an open source project, feel free to contribute as well if you spot something. So I'm really excited to see the sort of ideas that you all come up with, and yeah, really what you can do with orchestration because there's so much you can do. Even I don't know the full possibilities. I have a pretty good idea, but yeah, I want you all to prove me wrong.
And even we are excited to see, what project we'll be getting. Or let's see. We have just few hours left for the hackathon. I'll give the stage to you. Will just take over. Uh, Tell us about project ideas which you have, and even I'm excited to learn about Kestra.
Yeah, so Kestra, I'll go over to our website. So Kestra as an orchestration platform originally started sort of targeting data orchestration. So that's stuff like ETL pipelines, training ML models, that sort of thing. The sort of thing that you would typically have done maybe previously in like Airflow, for example. But because Kestra is designed to be language agnostic, and Kestra is designed to scale really nicely and be declared in YAML, uh, you don't have to just do data orchestration. You can do infrastructure orchestration. You can do just simple automations. If you can imagine it, you can create it in Kestra. And so I think that's where we can sort of start coming up with a few different ideas of what we can actually do at the hackathon. So, for example, data orchestration, that's sort of like where Kestra was sort of founded, right? With that as a core. And so, what I would suggest here, and actually, I can go to our solutions page for data engineers. There we go. So, here, I think the key thing is obviously ML and AI is such a big thing at the moment. Training models, building LLMs, all those sorts of things I think are, super key at the moment. And Kestra can help enable that process for you. Whether that's, you send data to Kestra, Kestra then runs your scripts and processes it and then sends it off somewhere else. Or you use Kestra to be able to, scale that by having multiple pipelines running at the same time. So I'd love to see if anyone's interested in playing with LLMs this weekend, which I'm not super experienced in. So I'm curious to see what kind of ideas people have in the chat. Maybe you can let me know some general ideas. I know maybe some of you don't want to spoil what you're going to do, but yeah, I'd love to see some of that. And something that we actually added to Kestra semi recently was real-time triggers. So previously our triggers would be event driven based on a polling. So you just sort of poll every, however long, 1 second, 1 minute. And that's great and all, but if you want to have, real precision in your workflows, using a real-time trigger, it means that you can, as soon as that data is ready, maybe you've got a pipeline that's training data. As soon as that data is ready, you can have a separate workflow, process that, do something with it. That's where the real-time trigger can come in very, very handy. So maybe that's something some of you could look into. So we talked about data. Data is not something I am super experienced in, but software engineering, that's something I've got a little bit more of a background in. So let's have a look at that. Now, because Kestra is language agnostic, and I can show you a little bit about that in the demo, um, it means you can use any programming language that you like. By creating one of our shell tasks, you've now just got yourself a small Linux environment effectively. So you can, and it's in a container. So any Docker image you want, whether that's maybe Golang so that you can then build with Go, or GCC so you can now build with C and C++, whatever it may be, you can create an environment that you can then run whatever stack you want. So if you want to do Rust, we've got you covered. You want to run Python, we've got you covered. You want to run PHP, don't worry, we also have you covered. So that's another idea that you can do, is sort of use Kestra to run your code, because that's a common thing at hackathons, right? Is that at hackathons, you build this code, it's great, but like, how do you deploy it, right? Well, what does that even mean? Sometimes your code is just something you need to run, and Kestra is a fantastic tool for being able to run that code. And again, I'll show you a demo of that shortly. So, yeah, in Kestra, if you are wanting to simply be able to pass some inputs to your Python script, for example, process that, and then receive some outputs from it, or files or something, Kestra does a really good job of that, and then allows you to connect that data over to Slack, over to S3 to upload it, whatever it may be, it lets you do it. So that could be another avenue that you could explore, is building something that you then facilitate with Kestra, or orchestrate, you could say. And then, because you can configure how your workflows start with triggers, you can, make it event driven, maybe make it on a schedule. It runs every day, every second, or maybe it runs every single time a webhook is called. Again, there's a few options. Now, I also talked about webhooks there very briefly. Now, let me bring up that. Now, Kestra is API first by design. So this means that you can use Kestra here as something that will run your code, but maybe you have a web app that's running somewhere that is communicating to Kestra, effectively treating Kestra kind of like your backend. Because a lot of the time, you might need a web server simply just to take on requests and then run your code. In fact, I had this actually previously once, where I had a Discord bot, for example, and I wanted to be able to have the Discord bot just had to be alive all the time, just so that if I sent a message, then it would process the data and do whatever I needed with it. Now, Discord's a bad example because it's a chat bot, but if you had a website where you had to have a web server running purely just to receive requests and process them, you could use Kestra as your web server effectively, where using our API, let's say someone clicks a button and then you want it to process a bunch of data, you can receive that data from the API request, use Kestra to process your code with that data, and then you can tell it to upload to S3, send a message, whatever. And you might be wondering, but why couldn't I just use a web server? Well, the thing is, a web server by default doesn't come with, a rich UI that allows you to view the statuses of how things have gone, when things have failed, how to handle failures. A lot of that's kind of packaged into Kestra, whereas you'd have to do all of that manually and build that yourself with a web server. So you could treat Kestra a bit like a web server, where you've got a nice, sexy React JS front end that's going to let users configure things, maybe a storefront, maybe something like that, where they select a bunch of items, they press go. The way API then tells Kestra, we've got an order, process the order. And then you can have your pipeline then process that order. So maybe something along those lines. I know that someone in the chat was actually asking a while ago about, can I use Android? Now, I actually did a cool bunch of things with Android when I was at university, and absolutely, you could totally make API requests from your Android app directly to Kestra, and then have Kestra do stuff, and then you could have Kestra send stuff back to your Android app. So a few kind of different ideas there. So yeah, API first by design. And actually, if you go to the Kestra YouTube channel, we just released a new video this week on getting started with the Kestra API. So if you're interested in learning how to get started with that, there is a video guide and a written guide on our website. So I would recommend checking that out. So we've talked about API by design and how you can use both HTTP requests, but we also have a load of cool things with webhooks as well, where you can trigger workflows from webhooks. So that could also be a particularly good option for you. And you can also use those by connecting them to your CI/CD and whatnot, so you can get Git to automatically sync with Kestra. That's another thing. There is fantastic Git integration with Kestra. So maybe you have Kestra trigger when you push to GitHub. Maybe you use a Git repository to help orchestrate what's going on. You upload files to GitHub, Kestra does stuff with those files, and vice versa. So I've now spoken a fair bit about what Kestra is. We've talked about the fact that you can do scheduling and automation with it, that it's language agnostic, that it's API first. That's all great. But what is Kestra? What does it even look like? How do I use it? So let's jump into a short demo here where I'm going to walk you through a little bit about Kestra, show you a couple of examples to help you understand how some of those ideas that we discussed can be then turned into real projects. So, first of all, how do I even install Kestra? Is it hard? Is it going to take me a lot of time? Now, Kestra, conveniently, we have an installation guide on our documentation. Now, there's sort of two approaches you can take here. Uh, Under Docker, we have a quick start guide here, where if you run this one command here, this will run Kestra straight away. However, if you close that command, you will lose all of your data because it's running an embedded H2 database as part of that command, which is running in memory. So as soon as you turn off the container, poof, disappears from your memory, gone forever. So this is good maybe for the weekend if you want to be able to just spin up spin up Kestra super quickly and get building. And this is what I'll demonstrate in a minute. But you can also use Docker Compose, where all you've got to do is take our Docker Compose file, which you can find on the website. It's on GitHub, actually. So here you can easily access the Docker Compose file, and you can see it here. You don't actually need to worry about what's inside of this Docker Compose file. You just need to take this file and then save it on your machine as docker-compose.yaml. And then once you've done that and you make sure you've got Docker and Docker Compose installed, we can then simply write Docker Compose up-d. Now, this might be Docker -compose or Docker space compose, depending on what version of Docker Compose you're running. And you can put -d to detach it, so it will just run in the background, or you can just put up, which is what I normally do, and it just leaves it in the terminal. So I can easily restart it. It'll turn it off if I want to. The reason for doing that is that will then use a Postgres database, which will then be persistent. So if you then turn off the container, restart your laptop, you don't lose all your data. Preferable. But if you want to just get started straight away, you don't want to have to hang around any longer. What we can do here is simply just grab our Docker run here, and we'll put that in. But I'll show that off in just a second. I can see we're going to take a quick pause, and we're going to talk about a few things about the hackathon, and then I'll jump into my demo.
Yeah. So before starting the demo, maybe let me share a little contests which we are running. So there are actually two contests. So one is wherein if you do early registrations, you'll be getting cool swags from Kestra, wherein we have t-shirts, stickers, and pens, right? And also, if you like, star Kestra on GitHub, just check out Kestra. There is, issues open. You can contribute to Kestra. Not just, hackathon is the main role. Hackathon is just here to help you get started with projects or new tools. Kestra is one such tool. So go around Kestra, look at all the issues open. Maybe try to contribute, try to get in the community, and don't forget to star if that can help you get another cool like swag hoodies and all from Kestra. So do we have something to maybe show them right now, or should we
swag? I'm wearing one right now.
Yeah.
Here is some of the swag that you could potentially win if you are successful.
So if you want to grab such tracks, register now. All the relevant links will be found in the description. We have got thousands of registrations, so we are excited about the projects. But if you haven't already, make sure to check out. And now I guess it's time for the demo.
Perfect. Cool. Thank you very much. So yeah, make sure if you want to get a cool t-shirt like this, and they're very comfy, I must add, definitely check out the down here starring us on GitHub, top 20 people who do it. And to get our Git repository, simply just kestra-io/kestra. Yeah, you can check out the repository here. Feel free to contribute. Contributions are always welcome. And actually, one thing I'll mention on that is we do have a label of getting started, good first issue. So you can easily filter by good first issues as well. If you'd like to get, contribute, get a cool thing on your GitHub profile, totally recommend. So just to recap. So installing Kestra, super, super simple because all we have to do is install Docker, which you can do using the Docker website. Once you've done that, you copy this command and then we'll paste that into our terminal. And this is simply going to run Docker on port 8080. And it's going to run it with an embedded H2 database. And yeah, we'll just see what happens. It might take a little bit of time. It's got to pull an image. Hopefully, I pulled it relatively recently. So we'll just give this a little second to download. And yeah, we'll see Kestra running in action. So that will then spin up Kestra as a web server and a backend. So it's all packaged together and it should just work. So you haven't got to try and set up various different things. As long as you have Docker and Docker Compose installed, then you should be covered. Hopefully that helps answer the question of how to deploy a Kestra to a web server. We can talk about how you can connect it to a web server by using API requests. And I'd recommend, again, you check out that Getting Started with Kestra API guide. That'll be your best place to look for that. Hopefully this doesn't take very long. It always takes far too long. My internet speeds they're pretty good, but Docker images, it says it's 1.5 gigs, but we all know that it's really more like, 500 gigs because that's just how Docker images work. Cool. Now, if you do want to configure Kestra by using that Docker Compose file, the Docker Compose does have what we call the configuration. And then here's where you can change things like basic authentication, exactly how it's using your database, those sorts of things. For the hackathon, I wouldn't worry about this too much. I'd focus on just getting Kestra started and start building with Kestra. But if you want to do something that's a little bit, different, that maybe integrates Kestra a little bit differently, then you can do that too. We're getting there. We're getting there with the download. Let me know in the chat what sort of things are people interested in. Has anyone got any ideas? Anyone got teams formed already? I'd love to sort of find out a little bit more about what people have already got ready in their minds before they get started on Friday. And actually, this is a good opportunity to call out that while I'm not going to teach you how to use Kestra right now, on Friday, I will be doing 2 separate webinars. On the beginning, I will be doing a webinar on how to get started with Kestra. So talking about the fundamentals of building workflows and how to execute them. And then when we get to the afternoon for me, evening for folks in India, then this will be kind of spin more towards how to integrate your code into Kestra. So we've got the fundamentals, we know how to build a workflow, but how do we then write things like Python where we can really integrate it into Kestra so that we can make it dynamic? It's very simple to run Python in Kestra, but being able to add, inputs and get outputs and fetch files, that is, a little bit more challenging. But we'll cover it and hopefully you'll be following along, no problem. As we can see here, though, Kestra has actually started to work. So we can have a look in a minute. Someone says content creation pipeline incorporating LLMs. I like your thinking because I'm trying to make content all the time for Kestra, and I could definitely do with an LLM to give me a hand. Maybe I need a fake version of myself to make videos. Cool. So Kestra is running. What I can do now is head over to localhost 8080, and we'll see that it's going to spin up Kestra straight away, just like this. Now, to help you get started, we do have a getting started video that is a little bit outdated now. Kestra looks a little bit different, so do bear that in mind. But that will cover on how to build a Python, set up schedules, send notifications to Discord, all that good stuff. But to get started, let's create our first workflow. So here, what I can do is it's going to just give me, this is the thing. On my demo instance, everything's a little bit bigger, easier to read. So we'll swap to that in a minute. But as you can see here, if that's too small, let me know. We can make it a little bit bigger. I'll make that a bit smaller as well. Okay, so here I have a very, very simple workflow. At the top here, we have my flow ID. That's the name of my workflow. We have a namespace, which you could think of a bit like a folder. That's where it's going to be stored. I can have loads of flows in the same namespace, or I can have different namespaces for my flows. Depends if I want them to be grouped together. And then we jump straight into my tasks. Now, if you're familiar with GitHub Actions, you can think of this like steps of a job. Now, here I'm running a simple task here, which has its own ID. Hello. The type is a log. And then this has one extra mandatory property, which is a message. Now, if I press save and then zoom out again, we'll see that we actually can see a nice visualization of this. And when I press execute, we'll be able to see it just runs in action. Now you get this really like Gantt view here that helps you just visualize all those different tasks running. Now, this is not a great example because there's only one task, but when you've got like 500 tasks all running, then you can see them all and figure out which ones are running in which order and how long they all took. And we can see here very simply that it did print out our message. We can view that as well here in the logs, where I can easily filter between different log levels as well. So it makes it really easy to debug your workflows. Now we can view the topology view too, and we can view information there. So that makes it quite easy, but again, not a great demo with any one task. Any outputs that get generated, we can view here. Now, as a log message, it didn't generate any outputs. It just generated a log. So there's nothing here, but we'll show that off in a second. And then metrics. So sometimes some tasks will measure how long it took, how long certain bits took. You can find that here. So that gives you a quick overview of Kestra. Now I'm going to just turn off this container. Now I've turned that off, we're going to lose all of our data. So not very good, but that's okay because I have an example here of Kestra that's been used for a while now. This is of the open source edition, so the same that you'll use for the hackathon. And as you can see here, if I just make that a little bit smaller, I've got a nice dashboard here on the homepage that kind of gives me a good overview of what's going on here. So I can see that my workflows are most successful. There's been a few failures that I can easily come and jump in and get a little bit more idea of what's going on. And the failures are purely down to me making typos rather than maybe something else more critical. I can see how many workflows I've got, and then triggers. These are the things that will start my workflows potentially on their own. If I scroll down, I can see what's in progress, and I can also see here workflows that are scheduled to run. So if I want to be able to pause them, I can do so very easily. And I can also read logs and executions. Now, this demo instance isn't too bad, but one of my instances, I accidentally created a race condition where the workflow just kept triggering itself, and then it just generated tons of executions. So this is quite useful, being able to spot when you maybe make some mistakes like that. Yes, as it says on the screen, if you have any questions, do let me know. I've got the chat just open to the side of me, so I'm having keeping an eye out for it. So if you do have any questions, do let me know. I'm more than happy to answer. Okay. How do I connect Kestra with Firebase Firestore? Now, I have to remind myself here, I'm pretty certain that we have a Firestore plugin. So if you want to use Kestra with Firestore, which is down here, we have tasks for delete. Oh, it's disappeared. Where'd it go? It'll be under Google Cloud. Where's Google Cloud? There you go, Google Cloud. Here we go. My bad. So we can see that there's task for delete, get, query, and set. So you can very easily come in here and get data from your collections. You can set new data. Very, very simple. If I set this to query, yeah, so here I can specify the collection, I can add filters, and then when I get this data, it will generate an output, and I can then use that output, so such here rows, to then process that data and then maybe hand that over directly to a Python script, for example, and so on. So I definitely recommend checking out this, but you could also write Python code yourself and use the Python package to integrate with Firestore if that's something you'd be interested in. Is there any time limit for a flow execution? No. However, in our next release, we are adding the feature of flow level SLAs. So you'll be able to specify this flow should not stop, not run for any longer than 10 minutes. If it does, then cancel it or fail it, because clearly something's gone wrong here and it's got stuck. So bear that in mind. Another thing about flows as well is we have a property called timeout. So you can tell specific tasks, such as maybe a Python script, to time out after, again, 10 minutes or so. So if you run into a dilemma like that, then you can manage that as well. Some of the plugins are deprecated. Does that mean you no longer recommend them from the list? If you can specify which plugins, I mean, some of them are deprecated, but they're normally deprecated with a new one to replace it. So let me give you an example. So Python, we have 3 Python ones. Originally, Python itself was the original version of Kestra. That's what we used to use. This would do scripts and commands. They've now been split into 2 separate tasks so that you can be a little bit more control and it's a little less cluttered. For context, a script is where you run everything in line with your Python code. So hang on. There we go. Here's commands. So commands is where you run commands for your Python code. So maybe you've got everything in a separate file and you want to simply just be able to call Python and the name of your file. That's where you would use commands. But for the script one, which doesn't seem to want to work, let me give that a refresh. Like here we go. So here you can see you can write the Python code directly in line with your workflow. I don't recommend this for super long Python files, but if you need to just write a few lines of Python to generate something, especially if you want to pass in a dynamic value, then you can do that here. And I'll show off a Python demo in a minute. Someone asks, what type of projects should we build? Are there any rules which state that we need to build projects only in specific categories, or we can make projects in any category we want? Now, all the rules are on the website. I think pretty much that as long as you use Kestra, then you're all sorted. So you can, build however you like for these different categories. But the key thing is they all need to use Kestra. So how you use Kestra, that is up to you. I want to see a variety. I don't want everyone just to build ETL pipelines because that's no fun. So if you think of something quirky or something that's really innovative, then you should definitely give that a go.
I totally agree with you, Will, but I'm here just to add one point. So, if you are aiming for other prizes, you don't need to use Kestra in there. But if I were to participate in an hackathon, I would be aiming for prizes such as MacBooks and Mac Mini. So make sure you utilize this webinar to learn about Kestra. You can also start working with the basics of Kestra right now, since we would require you to start building the project once the hackathon starts. So make sure to check out the rules of the hackathon, because this is the section wherein you'll find all the guidelines which we have for this particular hackathon. As far as what type of projects you should build, maybe stick till the end of this webinar, wherein we might discuss few project ideas which which would interest you in building projects with that roadmap. Yep, that's it.
Perfect. Perfect. So I'm going to jump. I see we've got a few more questions. I'm going to jump into a demo now to hopefully answer a bunch of these at the same time. So when I go into Kestra, I can see all my workflows here. And this is a specific one I've got called example. Now in here, I can see the topology view of it, where I've got a trigger at the top here, which is a schedule. This will start my workflow. It's grayed out because I've disabled it so it doesn't just keep running in the background. We have our code, which is Python, and that's using the script task. So that will be written inline our YAML. Then we've got a Slack notification that will send a message to Slack to let us know what's going on. Then we have an if statement here, and we can use input to basically determine whether this if statement should be positive or not. And then this red line at the side here is an error block. So if any of this fails, it will send a Slack notification to let us know that it failed. So really, really simple to visualize with this view. Now, if I go to executions, I can see previous times I've ran this. I can also see previous revisions and whatnot. Now, if I go to editor, this is where the magic happens. So here we have our YAML editor. Now, Kestra workflows are declared in YAML. This makes it very simple and very readable for those who aren't maybe familiar with Kestra's syntax. Now, we've also got on our right-hand side our built-in documentation. So anytime I click on any task, so here's the Python one, it will immediately bring up that Python documentation. So I can see here, which properties I can use. So the script one is required. I can see that warning on error is not required, but it's got a default value, so I don't need to specify it. Before commands is not required, but I'm going to use it today so that I can specify an installation of from pip and whatnot. It does mention the other things that are deprecated as well and whatnot. And if I scroll down even further, I can get outputs. So I can see that I can generate outputs from this code, which we're going to do shortly, as well as any other things too. I can also go to the topology view. And in here, I can now use this UI to actually edit the workflow. So someone did mention, can we use the drag and drop feature of Kestra in our front end by using any API and plugin? Now, I'm going to answer some of that. I'm not sure I fully understand if you mean. So let me explain how this drag and drop works. So here we can move these around. We can edit them. So here I can edit my Slack message to say different things. I can say total. I can, edit what the payload looks like. I can add all this. Now, if I was to change this, actually, I'll scroll down so we can see it. So here is the Slack message. You see it here. The payload is total and then an expression. If I click on the little pencil here, I can actually add properties. So here I can say a notification. So now when I press save, you'll see that it's added that property to our YAML code automatically. I'm just going to add a new line there to space that out. So we can see here that it added that property directly from the UI. So anytime you edit in your YAML code, the UI will update to reflect that. And anytime you update the UI, it will reflect that in the YAML. Now, you can use the API to add new workflows and modify them and so on. So if you modify any of those workflows, it will reflect in the UI over here too. And that's sort of the beauty of Kestra, is that you can use the UI entirely if you want, or you can use the YAML editor. It's entirely up to you. Now, I imagine at the hackathon, we've got a lot more sort of developer-minded people who are probably going to prefer writing in YAML. So I'm going to mostly focus this demo on using YAML. But if you are interested in the low code editor, then let us know in the comments. I'm curious. So I'm just going to get rid of that description right there. So here we have a workflow. I mentioned earlier that it has an ID and a namespace. Now, workflows can also have inputs, and these are data that we can pass in at the start of a new execution of this workflow. So here I'm asking for two different inputs. I'm asking for a string and a float. I'm asking for a string that's going to contain our database URL, our data set that we're going to process in Python. And the next one is going to ask for a simple number with validation to make sure it definitely can't be higher than 1 and it can't be lower than 0. So when I press execute, you'll see that I get this really nice view here that lets me change the URL if I want to. I can also change the discount amount so that when I press execute, we've got a dynamic workflow now that's using different values every single time without having to modify the actual workflow itself. So inputs are very, very helpful in that regard. And you can then pass through inputs in the API as well if you trigger your workflows with an API request. Or if you instead use a schedule, you can also say for this specific schedule, use these inputs. But if I run it manually, I want to use different inputs. Now, when I go down to my Python code, excuse me, this Python code here is a script task, which means our Python code is directly inside of our workflow. This is really convenient for a demo because it means you can see everything in one place. And it's also really convenient because I can use Kestra expressions here directly in my code. So here I'm using pandas here to generate a data frame. And I'm using the read CSV method here to be able to fetch our CSV from a URI. And I can actually just pass that URI directly into my Python code using an expression. Now, you can do this with a dedicated file by using environment variables. And we have a guide on our website on how to do this. But this is really convenient for being able to, again, make your Python code dynamic here. Now, On top of that, as you can see, I'm just getting the total sum from our data frame. And then I'm using the Kestra Python package to then generate an output. And this does work for any other programming language, but we have got a package to make it a little bit cleaner for Python and JavaScript. So as you can see here, I am just simply passing a dictionary with total and then our new variable here, total revenue. So now when I execute this, I'll see in the Kestra outputs that we have a number from this data set. Moving on, we have another part here that's using an expression. Now we've got a simple if statement here that's basically saying, if there's a discount, then let's do something with that discount. So if we leave it at 0, which is the default value, it will just skip over that. But we can change that, and then it will generate ourselves here a nice little discount, and then it will generate a new column in our CSV file with the prices with a discount value. So when I do that, I'll be able to access that as an output file, which I've specified up here, which I can then use in later tasks, or I can simply just download in my Kestra execution log. Now, I talked about outputs. We can access those outputs later on in separate tasks. So when I move on here to this Slack message, which is simply just an incoming webhook, and all we have to do is specify the webhook URL and the payload. We'll talk about the URL in a minute and what that means. But here, I've simply just got a message here that says total with a $sign, and then I'm using an expression to access that output. Now, the outputs are done by saying outputs dot, and then here we've got the ID of our workflow code. So I'm doing .code. And then if we go back to the Python documentation, we can actually see when we get to the bottom. So here we can see that it generates 3 different outputs: an exit code, output files, and vars. And because we want to get the variable that we've generated, it will appear under vars dot the name of it, which in this case is total. So now we can access the values directly from our Python code in separate tasks, which is really, really helpful. Otherwise, I'd have to write all of this directly inside of my Python code. And now my Python code's got quite big and ugly because all of a sudden what went from being a data pipeline is now got all of this extra stuff on it. It's hard to maintain. It's cluttered. Ugh, not what you want. Now that I've generated my Slack message, we're moving on to our if statement. Now here, our if statements again are defined in YAML. Excuse me. Now here, I'm specifying the type again using that. And the thing is that the editor here makes that really easy. Now, if I just try and make a new workflow here and I just call this if, you can see that when I type, we get a really good auto completion here that makes it really easy to be able to just find what it is. So and I know that this is under flow.if, and as you can see, it just comes up here by it just comes up here automatically. And if I've managed to open Notion. Whoops. As you can see here, it comes up with the other thing. So I know that I need the condition property because if I again click on the documentation, I can see that we need then is a required property and a condition is a required property. So here I can easily add in my expression. If I type in input, it auto completes again. And then because it's an expression, I can put simply like if this is greater than 0 or if it's true or whatever. Same for then, I can easily just add that in. And I'm going to remove that for a second because we already have that here as well. Now here, as you can see, we've got a new group of tasks that are inside of the if statement. Here, I'm simply using our S3 plugin to upload our output file. And as you can see here, we've got that output file specified here under outputs.code and then output files. And then you just hand it a key to a dictionary. In this case, process orders.csv. Now, we can actually make this even more dynamic by taking this key value that I have here, copy that, and then I can just make an expression on that later. Now, we can make that an input as well. If I do ID here, and I can just call this file name, we can give it a type of string. And as you can see, the auto completion is here once again. And then I can set a default value here as that. Now, if I want to make that look a little bit nicer in the UI, I can just simply do that. Because by default, you'll see that when I click on here, these have nice little names. But if I get rid of that property like so, you'll see that it's just going to say file underscore name. So display name is definitely my preference here. Now I've done that, I can go up here I can now simply make an expression here called inputs.filename. So now that's going to use the new file name. And then I can also do the same down here. And I can just go in my expression inputs.filename. So I've made that dynamic now. Then we can move down again. And here I can easily put in here, again, my inputs.filename. Now I can also, I think I can do this. We'll find out together. I can also put inputs.file_name in here. Now I've had to wrap it in render because we're effectively rendering an input inside of an input. So here it will get the value and it will put it in here very conveniently. And then I have my access keys here saved in the KV store, which is the key value store. We'll talk about that in a minute. So I've talked about how we can make things dynamic with inputs. Outputs allow us to do the same thing with tasks that have generated data. Now, let's say we want to add a little bit of error handling to our workflows. We can do that with this errors block, which is just like the tasks one that we're currently using, but this will only run if there's an error. So if any of the tasks finish with a failure, then we can run these set of tasks, which is pretty useful for like alerting or maybe spinning down things that maybe, any, wind down processes you need to run. You can do that with the errors block. So here, again, just a simple Slack notification. This one's a Slack execution one, which means it will just have information about the execution. And as you can see, we're passing in data about the current execution here into this property at the bottom. Now, at the end here, we have triggers. Now, triggers is what starts our workflow. Here we have a simple trigger here that is going to simply run daily based on the cron expression. Now, I don't have to use cron expressions. I can also use conditions. So I can say only run on bank holidays, or only run at weekends, or only run on the first Monday of each month. So you get a load of control there to decide when this is going to run. Now, I've talked about this far too long, so I think we should go and visualize this by executing this in action. So let's have a look at that. So if we press execute here, I can now set, I'll leave everything as default so we can see what will happen. And we can see if this new file name is going to work. So if I press execute, you'll see that what it's going to do is it's going to start to process the Python. We can click on it to see some of those logs, and we can see it's going to use a Docker task runner. So it's going to build the whole thing in a Docker container to keep all of our dependencies isolated. Now, this is going to take a little bit of time, and we can actually click onto the logs here to view that too. And we can say this is running trace. I can see that it's thinking away at trying to pull our Docker container. Now, if you haven't used Docker task runners in a while, it can take a little bit of a while to pull that image. As you can see, it's pulled the image now. It's created our container. It's installed any dependencies we need inside of it. It's finished successfully with a command exit 0. And then we can see it's deleted the container. And then what we can do is if I minimize that, we can see that it ran the Slack message, no problem. And we can see that it ran the if statement, but it didn't run it because the if statement was technically false. So if I go to logs, we can view that too. We can easily view that here in different views. We can jump between the log messages. If I set the log level to trace and we click go, I don't know why that's not working. I am using a pre-production version of Kestra, so bear that in mind. We can also go to the topology view, and here we can see how long each task took, if they passed, if they failed. So this is, again, a really good way to visualize what's going on. So, all very useful. Now, if I go to outputs here, this is where the magic happens. So here, I can see the 3 different tasks, and I can see that 2 of them actually generated outputs. We'll look at the Python one to begin with. So here we can see it generated a vars, and in here it's got that value total with that float that we were expecting. And I can debug this value here as well by writing those expressions directly into the editor here. Now I can also go to output files and see that we did not generate any output files because we set the file name where we had no discount, so it didn't generate any files. We can also see that the if statement, for example, generated to say that it was false, which is quite useful as well. Now, I reckon we should execute this again, but this time I'm going to add a 0.1 discount. So that would be a 10% discount. Yeah, 10% discount. And we've got our file name there. So if I press execute now, what we'll see is it's going to run that code, hopefully a bit quicker now we've got that Docker image pulled from GitHub. And we'll see that it's going to run hopefully quite nicely. We can see that it ran successfully. The if statement here failed. Interesting. and we can see the Slack message failed. It failed because it didn't understand how to run the input that we put in, but that's fine. We kind of expected that might actually happen. But I'd love to see if that's something that someone can figure out in the chat or maybe at the hackathon. So I'll change that back in a minute so we can see that running in action. Like so. I'm curious if I do that. We're going to do a little bit live debugging to see if we can get that file name to appear directly inside of Kestra. So as you can see, it's running our code. And as you can see, it did actually work this time, uploading to process orders CSV. It's because I put the dashes either side. It confused it a little bit. So as you can see here, we can easily visualize with the GAMP view. I can click on output files this time, and I can see that it did generate our file. I can preview the file directly inside of Kestra, which is pretty neat. I can also download it if I want to. I can see the exit code finished successfully. And then S3 is the same. I can see it did upload it to S3. And actually, let me just open a new tab and I can log into S3 so we can have a little look. Yeah, let me log into our console quickly. Let's just have a... Let me just have a quick look for that in S3. Here we go. Oh, hang on a second. There we go. Brand new AWS console. Very nice. So as you can see here, it is November the 27th. It for me is about 2:15, and we can see that our file was in fact uploaded to S3 very conveniently, just like we expected from the workflow. And we also wanted to see the Slack notification. So I'll quickly grab that now. So as you can see here, we had Slack has sent me the message 3 times now in total, which is not very helpful. But if I was to make this purposely fail, so maybe we could type in a command here, such as exit1, that will really confuse it. Well, see, the Python hopefully will crash pretty quickly. There we go. Failed big time. And it sent a Slack notification. But if we go to topology, we can see it ran the Slack notification of that fail branch. And if I open Slack again, you'll see that it did tell us that it failed. And if I click on this link, you'll see that it's going to open up that execution with a nice error message to let us know it failed. Jump in here and let's have a look. So very, very helpful to sort of visualize that a little bit. Turn on dark mode in AWS. How do I turn on dark mode? There you go. Is everyone a little bit happier? There we go. Cool. So that gives you sort of a brief overview of Kestra. And as we can sort of see, that all the yellow here is our dynamic expressions. This has made Kestra really dynamic. Oh, that was it. I was going to show you what the KV store was. So like I mentioned, all of our flows are stored inside of YAML. Now, if I head over to namespaces, we can go into the team one, which is what we're in, company.team. Here I can see a bit of a summary of everything happening in our namespace, but I can also see here under editor, I can see files that we could run. So if I want to run individual files, I can do that too. I've got a couple here that are just, ready to go quite conveniently. I can also view all the flows in this namespace, which is lots, executions, dependencies. So you can see that some of these rely on one another. But the key thing is the key value store. And so here you can see that I can add values in here so I can access them in my workflow, but I then don't have to version control my workflow later on. So it means that if I want to add my workflow to Git, put it in GitHub, I don't have to accidentally expose my credentials. But you can also add secrets too. The best way to do that is adding them to your Docker Compose as an environment variable. So you can do that too. Cool. So that's a kind of a bit of an overview of Kestra. I'm going to have a look at the chat now. We've got about 5-10 minutes left. So get your questions in. I'll be more than happy to answer. But if you think of anything between now and the hackathon, I'll be doing 2 webinars on Friday, and I'll also be doing Discord office hours.
And you can find all the relevant links to maybe set a reminder for all these webinars. Head over to We Make Dev's website, You'll find a nice schedule. You can set reminders. I guess that was all about the demo. Well, I
Yep.
think went pretty great. And typos, we just can't avoid them. Okay, so before moving to the next part, I'll maybe drive your attention to a few questions which were left out. Maybe this one, how to use Kestra with tools such as AppWrite or such.
Yeah, so we don't have any AppWrite native plugins, but in the same way that like you could use Python to talk directly to AppWrite. So if you wanted to use AppWrite like a bit like a database, I guess in the sort of way you could use it like Firestore, then you could have a Python script that maybe is running that. You could actually have multiple Python scripts. So you could have different scripts that do different tasks, such as like querying, setting data, deleting data, and then you could have different workflows set to run those tasks. So the best way to think about it is sort of take a step back, is that AppWrite, let's say that I know AppWrite can do lots of things, but we're going to focus specifically on storing data in AppWrite. You could have Python scripts focused on taking data dynamically and sending it to AppWrite and fetching data dynamically and then outputting it as an output. Then what we can do is we can have multiple flows for each of these. Now, something in Kestra, there is a concept called a subflow, which means that you can actually have your workflow execute other flows for you. So you could have a flow that basically goes query AppWrite. That calls your subflow. That subflow, think of it like a function, is going to run your Python script, fetch the data, and then send it back to your parent flow from that subflow. So that's one way you could do it. You can also have flows trigger using flow triggers. So you can say this flow should trigger when certain conditions are met. I don't think that's probably what you want. You probably want to use a subflow. So if you've got any more questions about that, I definitely recommend joining the Discord office hours on Friday and asking in Discord, and we can get a little bit more in depth there. But I think subflows and writing individual Python scripts could be the best way to sort of do that. And I'd love to see some sort of modularity there. I think that could be really cool.
And just for your information, folks, like Will is quite active on Discord as well. So if you have any questions, even after the webinar, just join Discord. You'll find the link in the description of this webinar. Feel free to ask any questions which might relate to Kestra, might relate to Hackathon. I guess Prashant, your question is answered. Will, can we write code in Kotlin as well?
Absolutely. Now, what I will quickly just show off is on the website under tasks, we have script tasks and specifically code in any language. If you go to programming languages, then what you can find in here is that we have dedicated plugins to these 7, but you can also write code in pretty much anything. So I don't have an example for Kotlin, but I do have examples for like Java, for example, which obviously pretty similar as they both run on the JVM. So yes, you can definitely run Kotlin. But you might have to do a bit of fiddling. Again, great one for Discord. We can like sort of debug it together and figure it out.
And next question would be, can there be multiple flows, each with its own set of tasks within a single project?
Absolutely. This is not a project for a workflow. This is the hackathon is not a workflow submission. It is a project. Your project might include one workflow and a separate project that interacts with the workflow. It might be multiple workflows that all interact with each other. If the workflows are very independent, I would see that like you're submitting separate submissions. Like if you built separate web apps that are completely different ideas, but you couldn't determine which one to do. So I would try and make sure they sort of interact with each other. Normally you can make them interact with each other with subflows or flow triggers. But yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Now a question for folks like me, Will. So let's say you are just starting in tech, let's say, and you are maybe participating in the hackathon for the first time. What points or what project ideas you have for me, or maybe for folks who are just starting in tech, so that they can make best out of this hackathon, or get the best learning out of it?
Yeah. So one of my learnings early on in my hackathon journey was keep your scope pretty small. It's really easy to think you're going to build the next Facebook, but you have to remember hackathons are only like 24 to 48 hours, which is really not that long. And so you're better off focusing on one like sort of small scope project that you can do really well than one really large project where all the bits sort of work, but not very well. And maybe they don't even talk to each other. So you end up finishing with a very big project that's still quite unfinished, because what you've actually planned is like a 3-month project that you're trying to do in a weekend. I think set the expectations realistically. And I've won quite a few hackathons with that sort of methodology. Go in, come up with a project idea. The project idea I would typically tailor around the prizes or the sponsor prizes. So this hackathon's obviously a little bit different because everything has to use Kestra, but ignoring that part, if I would look at the way I would look at this with if I was hacking was, okay, there's a prize for AI ML projects. Okay, first thing, we've narrowed it down to AI ML. That's what we're going to do. Even if that's not what I was most passionate about that weekend or whatever, it's something new to learn, and it's going to force me to learn about it in a time frame. And it's something other people are learning about, so we can learn together. So that's one way I would sort of start to do it, is look at the prize categories to help me narrow it down. Then I would sort of start to brainstorm. You can use things like ChatGPT to help you come up with some ideas. And that's what I didn't do that as a hackathon because we didn't have ChatGPT, but yeah, I'd come up with some ideas with my, friends who I was hacking with. And, but as the hackathon went on, to be honest, we would keep narrowing the scope, because we'd be like, actually, we're not going to have time to develop that part or do that part, or this is not really working, so we need to change it. Don't be afraid to cut features, because the reality is 3 features, small features that work really, really well together are what I would recommend. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open DevPost so you can see some of the projects I have built in the past that have been fairly low in scope. So one of them was called RapGod, for example, and this used a mobile API so that you could basically send a text message and then receive a phone call, and it would run a Python script in the middle to generate audio based on some text and then send that as an audio file to the phone call, so you would hear the message generated. It sounds complicated, but the reality is there was sort of 2 parts to it. There was the generating whatever the phone call spat out, and then there was the phone call integration. So 2 of us worked on this together. I worked on the phone call bit, so sending the text message and receiving that, being able to hand that over to my friend's code, and then generate the MP3 and send that back into the phone call. And then he figured out what that MP3 would contain. So that's one good example of where you can sort of keep a narrow scoped project. But this this was a good idea of how to do that. Another good one we did was Willmojis. I'm called Will. I think you can see where this is going. The idea was that this project basically just used an Azure Face API to take photos of my face and then generate those into emojis. Again, we broke it so that each person did a certain area, and then we had to figure out towards the end of the hackathon how to get those areas to connect up. Don't be afraid to talk to one another. So that gives you a few ideas of like, keep the scope small. Don't try and build the next Facebook. One, because it already exists. And I also think going for something slightly quirkier that's still quite impressive and technical and does solve some problems, but it's something that turns heads. Don't just build another Facebook or another this or that, because we've seen that before. Build something a little bit unique and special. It doesn't have to be a project that's going to change the world, but the skills you'll learn from it will be super, super valuable.
And all I can see, or I could see on that project list was the tag of winner, because I guess you won all of them. So I guess you would be the best person to share about, let's say, what's the most precious thing for a hackathon is to save time, according to me, right? So we have, went through team exercise, or maybe, distributing a work in a team. But do you have some points to share on saving time, wherein, folks can save time exploring Kestra and, maybe pinpoint to the right place wherein they want to head in?
Yeah, so one of the things we have in Kestra are blueprints. So don't be afraid to go, I want to start with Python. Here's one here. I can use this blueprint to get me started, and then you can go modify from there. These blueprints can definitely help you figure out what it should work like. So yeah, I want to use Google Cloud. I want to use a spreadsheet and run BigQuery. Here's an example that I can then take and modify to work for my example. So this is a good way of being able to speed that up.
I see one more question in the chat.
You spotted a bug. Let me elaborate the bug. I elaborated this in my API video, so you should have a look at that too. If I go to our API reference, It isn't deprecated. It looks deprecated because what is deprecated is the fact that you can't use a JSON object anymore. Instead, it uses a YAML object. So as long as you send it with a YAML object, it's absolutely fine. We are working on getting this repaired because obviously that is very misleading. We only noticed this recently. So good spot, but this does work as long as you paste with your request body has a YAML file inside of it.
And before we head over to the conclusion, make sure to check out WeBuilders website if you haven't already registered for HackFrost Hackathon. We have amazing prizes such as Apple MacBook, Mac Minis, and that too for every team member of the winning team. So you'll find all the relevant links in the description. If you haven't already joined Discord, make sure to join Discord because we are sharing updates there regularly. Would be also answering questions regarding Kestra, regarding Hackathon, in that Discord server itself. And if you haven't already checked out Kestra, make sure to check out this video itself. I see a question around still did not get about what Kestra is. Well, this is the right time. If you have taken part, rewind this video, start from the starting, check out Kestra resources. Everything is visible on available on our website. Start Kestra on GitHub to win amazing swags and all. You can find Kestra's GitHub handle easily using Kestra's website. That was all. Find all the links in the description. Will, do you have any closing remarks?
Yeah, just that for still trying. Obviously, Kestra as an orchestration platform can be a little bit hard to get your head around about what it is. We have some videos on our YouTube channel that can help you with this. So I'd recommend having a little look at those first. Yeah, you can find those like here. How-to guides on how to get started. We've got a bunch of like feature showcases. So I'd recommend checking out some of those. But to sort of summarize what Kestra is, it is a unified orchestration platform for helping you with automating tasks. So think of it a bit like GitHub Actions as a CI/CD platform or like Airflow as a data orchestrator. Hopefully that clarifies that. But otherwise, I'm super excited for the hackathon at the weekend. Yeah, make sure to check out my sessions on Friday. And if you've got any questions, let us know in Discord.
Yep. Thank you so much, folks, for joining in, and see you on 29th. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.